Welcome back, everyone. After a brief, I think, 2-week vacation, I appreciate the people who called me to find out how I was. I'm fine, and we're back at it today. It's still Bein Hazmanim. I'm more casual than usual. We're using the Beis Medrash, but it's all good. If I'm too casual for you, don't look, just listen. Okay. A general observation about the Parsha that I'll put into the mouth of the Ramban. If you recall in his introduction to Devarim, the Ramban talks about Devarim as being a recap of certain mitzvahs of the Torah and an introduction of certain other mitzvahs in the Torah. And I think in Parsha Shoftim, more than other Parshiot, we see this. We're not going to do it inside, so I'll just point it out. There are any number of Rambans that start with the words Gam zo mitzvah mivoeret shekvar tzivaba. Says the Ramban, oftentimes they'll say in this week's Parsha, this is a mitzvah we've encountered before in the Torah, but now the Torah is teaching us in greater detail. The Torah is giving us a deeper meaning. As opposed to, sometimes the Ramban will say, Zo mitzvah mechudeshet, lo nizkeret b'Torah. This is a completely new mitzvah. And then you have to talk about it, and usually Ramban does. If it's the mitzvah of Zeroah, L'chayam, V'keva, okay, why it wasn't mentioned before in the Torah. But just a general observation that this is a good parsha for the Ramban pointing out what has been mentioned before in the Torah, Zo mitzvah mivoeret, and what has not been mentioned before in the Torah, Zo mitzvah mechudeshet. Okay, that's a general observation. The Rambans we're going to focus on, hopefully for the most part, follow a bit of a theme. And the theme is process versus substance, which is sometimes you just need the process to work for there to be a halacha. You need to be rules that govern the system, even if we're not talking about absolute truth, and sometimes less so. Let's start relatively early in the parsha with the din of Asherah and really with the din of Matzeva. Okay, says the Torah, Perek Tezayin. Okay, pasuk towards the end of the parsha. Says the Torah as follows: Lo tita lecha asherah kol eitz, eitzel mizbach Hashem Elokecha asher ta'asalach. Right? Don't plant for you an asherah. Why can't you plant an asherah? Says the Ramban, because asherot or what the Ovdei Kochavim do, literally, va'asar oto ba'avur shehu minhag Ovdei Avodah Zarah. Okay? Next. V'lo takim lecha matzeva asher saneh Hashem Elokecha. Turns out, God hates matzevot, again, for the same reason. And Rashi speaks about it, and the Ramban's going to have a very strong question on Rashi. Says Rashi, V'lo takim lecha matzeva, Matzevet oven achat lahakriv aleh afilu lashamayim. You can't have one big stone to be makriv on lashamayim. Asher sanei mizbach adama u mizbach avonim tziva lasod. God said to make mizbeach. Ve'et zo sanei ki chok hayta lakohanim. Okay, God hates a matzeva because that's what the Canaanim did for their avodah zarah. Here's the problem. The avot all were making matzeva, and God loved it. So what changed? Rashi says it's true. Originally, God loved matzevot, but then because the Ovdei Avodah Zarah took that and made it a part of their worship, God came to hate it. So exactly that which the Avos did, which was a great thing that they did, we're prohibited from doing. Okay, says the Ramban. V'im kain, wait, if that's the case, asar ha'katuv ha'asherah va'asar kol notea b'har habayit af al pi shekavanato l'shamayim. If God prohibited planting all trees, even on Har HaBayis, which is, it's strange, my son's bar mitzvah for his bencher doesn't have the mosque on it. It has trees. Turns out trees are also Nisur D'Oraisa. Okay, v'asar matzeva l'shamayim u'shnehem mipnei chukot ha'knanim aval lo havinoti ha'chok hazeh she'ha'knanim gam b'mizbachot Gam b'matzevot hayu nohagim. Says the Ramban, okay, I understand. But how could it be that matzevot are asur and mizbachot are a mitzvah? Right? The Ovdei Avodah Zarah also use mizbachot. And if God hates matzevot, why doesn't he hate mizbachot? Okay, so answers the Ramban. We'll skip to the second of the answers. They're more or less the same. Says the Ramban, V'hanireh be'einai, ki ayu aknanim ashtufim ba'avodat gilulim osim b'chol batei Elohim mizbeach la'akriv olav ha'karbanot, ve'even gidola mutzevet al petach habayit la'amod aleh ha'kumarim. Right, every church, so to speak, has a mizbeach and has a big thing for the priest to stand on. V'ilan natu achutza la'asher derech habayim shaman, and tree outside to let people know where the church is. V'gam hayom hanotzrim osim kein. V'nei Hashem hanichbad sana u'ma'as kol ma'asehem v'asar hamatzeva v'ha'ashera. God hates the fact that Ovdei Chachamim do this. Therefore, he prohibited a matzeva and he prohibited an asherah. V'lo hishir rak hamizbeach shehu tzorech hakarbanot asher hu yitbarach tziva bahem. But he needed to leave the mizbeach, because otherwise, how are you going to bring a karban? V'hayu nachat ruach lefanav shamar v'na'aser ritzono me'az kodem hayot avodat gilulim ba'olam. And the Mizbeach was a nachas ruach for HaKadosh Baruch Hu before Ovdei Kochavim existed. It's a strange answer. Again, the question was, why did God prohibit just a matzeva and just an asherah? What about a Mizbeach? So the Ramban says, you know what? We need a Mizbeach. God loved the Mizbeach from before there was such thing of Avodah Zarah, but my sense is, he's saying, we can't throw out everything that Ovdei Avodah Zarah do. We have a religion also, and our religion has a need for a mizbeach. We could live without a matzeva. We could live without an asherah. Hence, they're asur min HaTorah. But with respect to mizbeach, we need it. And so the Ramban says, okay, God loved the mizbeach, and he didn't change his mind once the Ovdei Avodah Zarah started using mizbeach. But the sense you get is, it can't be that everything is chukos hagayim. 1,000 years later, when the Vilna Gaon said, we used to have a minhag, we still do, in the yeshiva we do, to put foliage in the Beis Medrash on Shavuos, because it's like Har Sinai. So the Vilna Gaon says you can't put a tree in the Beis Medrash because it reminds you of Avodah Zarah. We all know about Christmas trees. But there's a machlokes. Other achronim say, but we were here first. We had the idea first. Okay, so without being machriya, that's essentially what the Ramban's dealing with. And I think the Ramban is saying that which we can't live without, we keep. And we keep, and it's a mitzvah, and it's nachas ruach to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That which we can live without, we get rid of. Okay, that's the first point. Now, the parsha goes on. Okay, a terrible thing happens. And the Torah says, Al pi shnayim eidim o shlosha eidim yumat hamet, right? Based, if there are 2 witnesses or 3 witnesses, we kill the person. Lo yumat al pi eid echad. Right? That's the halacha, and everybody knows it. There's no actionable offense that we can punish for if there's only 1 witness. But if there's 2 witnesses, or if there are 3 witnesses, we can punish for them. Now, obviously, the question is, what's 2 or 3? Is there a benefit to 4 or 5? Why does the Torah say 2 or 3? So the answer is as follows. If I can find the Ramban. Okay. Says the Ramban as follows. Im mitkayemet edut bishnayim. I'm sorry, this is Rashi first. Im mitkayemet edut bishnayim lama parat lecha bishlosha. If you only need 2 witnesses, why does it say al pi shnayim o shlosha idim? Lahakish shlosha l'shnayim. A famous limud. Ma shnayim edut achat af shlosha edut achat ve'ein na'asin zomemin ad sheyazumu kulan. Lashon Rashi. Says Rashi, the famous limud in the Gemara in Makos is as follows. It's to be makish 2 to 3. However many witnesses you have, if you want to be mazim them, if you want them to be edim zomamim, you have to be mazim all of them. If you're only mazim one or two, and there are three witnesses, that's not called edim zomamim, ad sheyazumu ad kulam. V'chein, says the Ramban. In nimtza echad mehem karov upasul, the same rule applies to karov upasul. Edud kulam bitela, vehem kulam neheragim umishalmim mamon bahazamatan, sheikar katuv lakish shlosha lishnayim b'chol divrehem, kidat rabotenu. Okay, says the Ramban, that's the rule. You have to deal with the kat edim, however many they are. If they're 50, they all have to be karov apostle. If they're 50, they all have to be mezimim. Otherwise, they don't have the din of edim zomamim. But then the question is, okay, great. But is there a difference? Why would you ever have more than two witnesses, right? If two witnesses are like 100 witnesses, right, which is what the halacha is, if two witnesses is the highest level of proof, so why would you ever bring more than two witnesses? So says the Ramban. I'll skip a little. Tidrosh hadavar, so says the Torah. Yomar HaKatuv, kashehu gad lecha v'shamata, that's a quote from the Pasuk. Tidrosh hadavar heitev al pikol ha'edim hanimtzaim sham. You need to bring all of the witnesses who saw it. V'hinei, im shamanu she'avar bifnei shlosha, nishlach ba'avuram, v'yavo lebezdin ve'idu kulam. If we hear that 3 people saw this person be Machal Shabbos, then get all 3 people. Bring him to Bezdin. V'hu adin l'meya. If 100 people witnessed it, let's bring 100 witnesses. Why? Ki b'shamenu divrei kulam yitbarer ha'emet. Because if we listen to all of them, I'll say my way, the more witnesses, the merrier. Ve'im lo hayu sham yoter o shalchu lahem ve'inam nimtzaim bishnayim dai. The Ramban makes an important point here. He says, Trei Kimea, 2 witnesses are like 100. If we have 2 witnesses, then that's the highest level of proof that we have in halacha. But 3 is better, and 4 is better, and 5 is better than 4. There is the procedure, which is 2 edim, send a person to death. But there's a substance. Let's face it, 100 people who saw something are more compelling, and they're more convincing than 2 people. The halacha says 2 people, great. So we can kill a person with 2 witnesses. But 100 witnesses is more compelling. 100 witnesses, I believe much more than 2. 2 is enough. But if I have an opportunity to bring more, says the Ramban, I have to bring more. V'hinem shamanu shavar b'fnei shlosha nishlach ba'avuram v'yavo lebezdin v'a'idu kulam. So here I think the Ramban is making a similar point to before, which is you need a system, and the system is 2 witnesses. But the fact is more witnesses are better than 2. It's true, 2 witnesses are like 100 witnesses. But 50 witnesses are more than 2, not legally, but factually, but substantively. Procedurally, 2 witnesses, guy's dead. But substantively, the more witnesses we have, the better. And even though you could say, why bring more witnesses? It's just another opportunity to passel the edus. I think the Ramban would say, yeah, but it's another possibility to make the edus even more compelling. And so the procedure only requires 2. But the substance requires as many edim as we can find. Okay, next. While we're still talking about testimony and witnesses and so on, we come to a very, very famous pasuk. Says the Torah, Al pi HaTorah asher yorucha va'al hamishpat asher yomru lecha ta'aseh, right? Whatever chachamim tell you, lo tasur min hadavar asher yagidu lecha yaminu small. Right? You can't turn right or left from what they say. This, of course, is the pasuk lo tasur, is the pasuk that requires us to listen to Rabbanans. right? Maybe Machlokas, Rambam, and Ramban elsewhere, what this applies to, and if listening to a Drabanan then becomes a Doraisa. Okay, that's a whole interesting discussion. But the phrase, Lo sosumin ador asher yigidu lecha yaminu smol, is an interesting one, and the Ramban focuses on it. Says there, first he quotes Rashi. Says Rashi, Afilu im omar lecha al yamin shu smol, o al smol shehu yamin, lashon Rashi. Even if they get it wrong, even if he tells you what's mutter is asur and what's asur is mutter, if that's what Bezdin says, if that's what Chachamim say, you're obligated to listen. Okay, explains the Ramban. V'inyano, afilu tachshov belibcha, shehem toim, v'hadavar pashut be'einecha ka'asher ata yodea ben yamincha lismolcha, says the Ramban. He's not saying that they're wrong. He's saying even if you're convinced, tachshov belibcha, in your heart you're convinced that they're saying the wrong thing, ta'aseh k'mitzvatam. Again, there's the procedure and then there's the substance. We need a procedure that we rely on Chazal, even if we disagree. Va'al tomar, eich ochal ha'chelev ha'gamur hazeh, o ha'harog ha'ish ha'naki hazeh. How could I eat? I know it's chelev. How could I kill this person? I know he's innocent. Aval tomar, kach tziva oti ha'adon ha'mitzaveh al ha'mitzvot, she'eseh b'chol mitzvotav, kichol asher yoruni ha'omdim lefanav b'makom asher yivchar. Says the Ramban, rather say to yourself, it's a mitzvah HaTorah to listen to the Bezdin Hagadol. It's a mitzvah HaTorah to listen to Chachamim. I may think otherwise, but the system won't work, and therefore I'll listen to them. Va'al mashma'ut da'atam natan li HaTorah afilu yitu. And what they give me is the final answer, even if they're wrong. V'zeh kinyan Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Gamliel b'yom ha'kippurim shechal liot b'cheshbono. Right, the famous Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, where Rabbi Gamliel was the Nasi, and Rabbi Yoshua thought that he established Rosh Chodesh on the wrong day, which meant that for Rabbi Yoshua, Yom Kippur was the 11th of Tishrei, not the 10th of Tishrei. And when Gamliel made Rabbi Yoshua drive to him, in a car with his wallet on Yom Kippur, Shachal, on what he thought was his Yom Kippur, and Rabbi Yoshua did it. Okay, the question is whether that's a unique halacha of Kiddush HaChodesh, Atem, Afilu Mutayim, Afilu Shogim, Afilu Mezidim, or it applies all the time. That's the Gemara that the Ramban quotes, and maybe the Ramban is hinting that he thinks that that's the halacha all the time. Let's continue. V'utzrach b'mitzvah hazot tzorech gadol ma'od. Says the Ramban, this isn't just any old mitzvah. This is really, really important. Ki HaTorah natna alonu bichtav. The Torah is a written document. V'yaduahu shelo yishtavu hadeyot b'chol hadvarim hanoladim. And it's human nature that not everybody will agree and interpret everything in the Torah shebichsav the same way. V'hinei yirbu ha'machlokot. V'ta'aseh HaTorah kimo torot. Right, what will happen is machlokesim will multiply, and the Torah will become many Torot, and everyone will have their own Torah, because everybody will say, I can't listen to them. I know the truth. I think otherwise. V'tchatach lanu hakatuv hadin shenishma lebeit din hagadol ha'omed lifnei Hashem ba'makom asher yivchar b'chol ma sheyomru lanu b'ferush HaTorah. No, but the halacha is a procedural one. You don't have the right to disagree with Bezdin Hagadol. What they say goes, whether they're right or not. Bein shekiblu perusho aid mipi aid, Moshe mipi agvura. Whether Bezdin Hagadol says, I'm muzmekabel this father to son, mother to daughter, whatever, generation to generation to Moshe Rabbeinu, I know that's what Moshe Rabbeinu said. O sheyomru kein lefi mashmod HaTorah o kavanata. Or they thought, that's the Kal V'chomer, that's the Gzeir Shava, that's the Mem Hatzinu. They use one of the Yud Gimel Midos Shator and Dreshes Bahen. Either way, that's the halacha. Ki al hadat shelahem hu notein lahem HaTorah. This is a subtlety, says the Ramban. God is giving us the Torah al dat shelahem, to be interpreted by Chazal. Afilu yihiyeh be'einecha kim machlif hayamin bismol. Even if it appears to you that they're wrong, v'chol shekain sheyesh lecha lachshov shehem omrim al yamin shehu yamin, and really, it's overwhelmingly likely that they're right. You think they're wrong, but they're not. They're not. Ki revach Hashem al mishartei mikdasho, v'lo ya'azov et chasidav lo'olam nishmoru min hata'ut u'min hamichshal. God will help us. V'lashon sifri, afilu marin be'einecha al hayamin shu smol, v'al smol shehu yamin shma lahem. Now that sifrei is really important, because Rashi in theory is quoting the sifrei when he says, afilu omar lecha al yamin shu smol, o al smol shehu yamin, which sounds like even if they're really wrong. But in the original text, afilu marin be'einecha al hayamin, it appears to you that they might be wrong, but they're not. The Ramban thinks there are two things going on. Or better, I'll say it the way Rav Lichtenstein Zatzal, he used to quote, I think it was Justice Potter on the United States Supreme Court, who said, we're not final because we're right. We're right because we're final. Meaning, he's not saying every time the Supreme Court paskins, they're correct. He's saying, since they're the court of last resort, you can't appeal past the Supreme Court. Whatever they say is by definition right. And Rav Lichtenstein used to say, and I think he's mentioning, he means this Ramban, we would like to think about Chazal, that they're right because they're final. That's what the Ramban is saying here. But they're also final because they're right. That's also what the Ramban is saying here. That what they say has to be the halacha. Otherwise, we'll never be able to have one Torah. Right? The system is such, the procedure is such, that they must be right and we must accept their halacha. But in addition, it's overwhelmingly likely that with divine inspiration, with HaKadosh Baruch Hu's help, they are right. And even though you think Yamin small and small Yamin, you're wrong and they're right. Okay, that's that idea. But again, procedure and substance, the Torah needs a procedure for it to work. Okay, last one. We come to the parsha of the Melech. Okay. Okay, so first of all, you should know something. So you should know the Ramban more or less is in favor of a monarchy. Okay, the huge machlokes obviously about whether it's a mitzvah or not. Why does it say asima alai melech? The Ramban has his theory about that. He's in favor of monarchy, but of course subject to the specific restrictions of the Torah. What are the specific restrictions of the Torah? Lo yarbe lo susim, right? He can't have too many wives. Now it's true that the Torah gives us a reason, right? Lo yarbe lo susim. Why? Pen yashivat al mitzrayma. And he can't have too many wives. Pen yasurat livavo, etc. But the Ramban then finally comes to a point that's close to his heart. Pasuk Chaf of Perek Yud Zayin says as follows: Levilti rum livavo me'echav, ulevilti sur min hamitzvah yamin usmol, lema'an ya'arich yamim al mamlachto, hu uvanav b'kerev Yisrael. What's the most important restriction for the Melech? The most important restriction for the Melech is the vilti rum livavo, that he not be haughty. Now, okay, it's no surprise, but let's read the Ramban inside. Levilti rum livavo me'achav, nirmaz bikan batorah isur hageyut. The Ramban says it's hinted at. I don't even think it's hinted at. It's here. It's in the Torah. There's a prohibition on haughtiness. Now, it's interesting. The Ramban doesn't say there's a prohibition on the king to be haughty. The Ramban says this is the makar for a prohibition on all of us to be haughty. Ki hakatuv yimna'at hamelech migeyut v'romumut halev. If the Torah prohibits the king from being self-satisfied and arrogant and haughty and above the people, then v'chol shekain ha'acherim sheinan ru'uyim lekach. It's more likely that the king has what to be haughty about than you and me. And if he prohibits it for the king, he certainly prohibits it for me and you. Ki bira'ui lehitromemu lehitgadel, yazhirenu lihiyot livavo shafel kechol echav haktanim mimenu. Right? Because even a person who has what to be haughty about is told by the Torah not to be haughty. Now, at this point and up to this point, it seems like it's an isser beinom lechavero. If I'm haughty to somebody, that's a mean thing to do. If I hold myself above somebody else and I judge him and I do all the things that we don't like to do, I'm over this isser. But the Ramban sees more here. First of all, he says, Ki haga'ava mida miguna v'nimeset eitzel ha'elokim afilu b'melech. First of all, he says, arrogance is a disgusting attribute even for a king. That's still beinom lechavero. But then he says, Ki lashem levado hagidula v'haromimut. Because the greatness, the exaltedness, exists only with God. V'lo levado atihila. Only God is truly worthy of praise. Ubo yitalel ha'adam. Ki inyan ha'mevuah al yad ha'melech Shlomo. To'avat Hashem kol givalev. Right? Anybody who's haughty is despised by God. Uksiv ki'im bezot yitalel hamitalel haskel v'yadoti. Right? That whole pasuk in the HaTorah. Right? Yadoti ki be'elech hafatzi num Hashem. God doesn't like haughty people. Here I think the Ramban, and it's subtle, but I think the Ramban shifts. And he says that the isser of gavat halev, the isser of levilti rum levavo, it's also a pigiyah HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's also a violation of bein adam lamakom. Because you're saying when a person is arrogant, it's as if that person is saying, I'm better than other people. And what the Ramban hints at strongly is, there's only one entity in the world, and that's HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who's worthy of being arrogant, who's worthy of praise, who's worthy of all the great things that we think of. The greatest king in the world pales in comparison to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And it's ki'ilu disrespectful of HaKadosh Baruch Hu for a person to be arrogant. Because when a person is arrogant, it's as if he thinks he's worthy of the things that he's not worthy of. He's worthy of the praises that we give HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay, so the Ramban says here at the very end that the problem with Gavut Halev, the problem with Levilti Rum Levavo Me'achav, is not just Beinom Lechavero, which it certainly is, but it's also Beinom Lamakom. If you knew who HaKadosh Baruch Hu really was, if you respected HaKadosh Baruch Hu the way you should, you wouldn't be haughty, you wouldn't be arrogant. Okay, so we saw, I think, 4 different specific Rambans. The Asherah and Lo Tiyeh Lecha Matzeva. We talked about how Matzeva no, but Mizbeach yes. And again, maybe the line being, the things that we really need for the worship of HaKadosh Baruch Hu have to be mutter. If Goyim show up and start keeping Shabbos, we're not going to give up on Shabbos. Okay, that's one idea. Al Pi Shnayim Eidim, we saw 2 witnesses. That's the highest level of proof. And yet, more witnesses make it better. And if more than 2 people saw it, more than 2 people have to testify. Lo tosumin adavar sheyigidu lecha yamin u'smol, says the Ramban, as we saw, it's not that they're wrong. We suspect yamin is small and small is yamin, but we're probably wrong. And Bezdin is probably right, because they're not just right because they're final, as Ravan used to say, they're also final because they're right. And finally, we saw the parsha of the Melech, the limitations on the Melech, and the restriction on the Melech, levilti rum levavo me'achav, as being an isser, not just beinom lechavero, but beinom lamakom as well. Have a great Shabbos, have a great week, and I'll see you next week.